I am dad, husband, and entrepreneur.
Whether you're a budding chef or experienced restaurateur, there's room for all foodies in the Mess Hall kitchen. Based in Washington, D.C., Mess Hall is a culinary incubator fostering a community of food entrepreneurs. This food startup studio offers members shared kitchen spaces, educational programming, and engaging community events, as well as a diverse and powerful network in the local food scene. After nearly 14 years of experience in the catering and hospitality industry, Al Goldberg decided to start his own company in the very same space. But through his own experience in venturing out in the small business world, Al noticed a gap in the market for early-stage food entrepreneurs and sought to fill it with the Mess Hall concept. I first met Al in 2018 when I participated in an entrepreneurship course at my university. This flagship course allowed students to partner with local business owners and put classroom lessons to practical use. Through our work with Mess Hall, our cohort engaged with countless small business owners right in our own community, and we learned from innovators bringing unique food products and concepts from the kitchen to market and eventually to table. On this week's episode of Yuptown, listen in as we discuss communal spaces and saltanias, plus the lowdown on obtaining an SBA loan. I'm Victoria Principato, and this is Yuptown. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about your background. What did you study in school?
Yeah, so I too went to school here in the city. I came to GW. I came to DC to go to GW in 1993. Studied biology.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about how you broke into the food industry and the food space.
Yeah, I think it always called me. I always, as a kid, watched as many cooking shows as I could on PBS. The Julia Child and Jacques Pepin and Yan Can Cook before the Food Network came out. And I always had to cook for the family for dinner. My mom worked at night oftentimes. So I would prepare dinners, and I always felt a connection with food. And I think midway through school, I thought, well, biology isn't really my calling. I should probably transfer out of school and go to the Culinary Institute of America or Johnson and Wales or some other culinary school that better suited my interests. And then I thought, no, I'll just finish because everyone says you should have your degree. So I did finish, but decided to work in restaurants to satiate that need to be surrounded by food professionals. And so that's what I did. So I just worked in restaurants, in any kind of restaurant jobs that I could get.
Wow. And you did that full time?
I did it. I probably worked about 20 hours a week. I was also, on the varsity rowing team, and every once in a while I would go to class too. So yeah, at that point I was just ready to be done and kind of move on to things that I was more passionate about.
Wow. So then right out of school, did you just go work in a restaurant full time?
Nearly so. So I did my token year out of college job and then settled back into food. I answered a print ad in the Washington Post, as we used to do. On Sundays, they would come out with a big job section. Mm-hmm. So I thumbed through and found an account executive position that sounded just great at a local catering joint. It was 1999, and I worked there for, I want to say, 14 years.
Wow.
And I worked my way up through the company and helped grow it to one of the larger corporate caterers in DC.
Wow, that's incredible. And DC does have a very lively food scene. So much going on. There's so many people from different parts of the country, parts of the world. So it's really an exciting, melting pot. Could you maybe share the story of how you founded the Mess Hall food community? Did you always have an interest in the food product space as well?
Yeah, so that's a great question. When I was at the catering company, I had been there for a long enough time where it seemed like I was going to be able to purchased that catering company from an owner who was considering retiring, and he didn't seem to be any real traction with that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'll just go off and start up my own catering company. So there were a couple of people who worked for me there at the catering company. We thought that we would open up our own. So for about 2 years, we were looking for a space, and we couldn't find a space in DC that would accommodate our needs. So we looked at warehouse spaces and second generation restaurant spaces, all kinds of places that we thought we would be able to negotiate a lease, and it never happened. Notwithstanding the fact that we had a SBA loan in hand pending a 10-year lease, which would go hand in hand with that type of a loan program.
Got it. Yeah, sorry. Can you maybe tell me a little bit about the SBA loan program?
Yeah, the SBA loans are a great way for startup businesses to secure capital.
Mm-hmm.
The way they work is, contrary to popular belief, the SBA themselves are not lending you the money. They're basically guaranteeing the loan, or at least 80%.
Okay.
So if I were to go to a bank and I'll be like, I want to start up a business, and they're going to say, okay, well, where are your assets? And like, well, no, that's what I need the money for. There's this catch-22. The bank, who otherwise might not want to take on a risky investment like a startup, would process the loan as an SBA loan, where the government comes in, and the SBA, which is a Small Business Administration, comes in and says, look, if Al defaults on this loan, we'll cover 80% of it. And that alleviates much of the concern that the banks would have, because at worst they'll lose 20%, but presumably I'll have paid off, at least, lasted long enough to pay at least some of it. And then the bank basically is made whole. And then the lender would then be indebted to the government. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, if you default on an SBA loan, you're really in trouble, because then you owe the government money.
Right. And no pressure for you to find a space then.
I mean, let me tell you, they are like, that's right, exactly. I mean, and so basically the SBA said, look, find yourself a space. We'll do your loan. We also found a small lender called Eagle Bank, which is a great local bank. So they said, find yourself a space. And back to your original question, what led to it? We were 2 years into looking for a space, and we couldn't find one. We looked for underground spaces that are generally cheaper. We looked in warehouses. We looked in all parts of the city. And we couldn't get a deal done. Either it was too expensive, or the landlord got cold feet, didn't want to rent to a startup. So it was super challenging. So 2 years in, having negotiated on several spaces, we just decided that this was possibly never going to happen. So the partners decided that they were going to kind of get on with their lives and their families. And I thought, well, this is a real need here.
In 2014, Al met that need by starting Mess Hall, which today over 40 members call their culinary home. I should note, the ramp for entering the food market, whether for an individual product or a new restaurant concept, is a particularly steep one. First, in order to sell a food product, countless food, health, and safety regulations have to be met in order for kitchens to be deemed certified. Say, for instance, I wanted to start my own bakery. I couldn't legally just bake batches of cookies in my own kitchen and sell them to another business. And I definitely wouldn't be able to scale this way. So before actually bringing a new product to market on a large scale, food entrepreneurs may have to invest heavily in a workable kitchen space and equipment. And not only might food entrepreneurs face challenges in gaining access to suitable workspace, like Al did, but the initial investment these entrepreneurs take on is tremendously costly and risky. Also, being a newcomer in a local food scene can be challenging in itself. Entering a local market without a network of support is super difficult, and building this network takes time. So if a business can't really get off the ground, how can it sustain itself? Or what's more, scale. But this is where Mess Hall steps in. With its state-of-the-art facilities and tight-knit community readily available, Mess Hall helps guide new food concepts to market. By allowing food creators to spend time refining products and testing concepts, members can overcome barriers to entry, develop new concepts, and grow sustainably. At the time of founding Mess Hall, Al noted the widespread adaptation of shared economy services, including Uber, Zipcar, and even WeWork. After performing some market research, he found such a concept did exist for kitchen spaces across the country, but there was a glaring gap in his own community.
There was one in San Francisco, and there was one in New York. I went to visit the one up in New York called Hot Bread Kitchen. They're awesome. And spent, and at that point, the partners had left, but I thought this was something that could be done, especially having spoken with others who were in the food space or wanted to be in this food space who couldn't be, yet
Right.
didn't have their kitchen. So basically, another year later, so now we're on year 3 of looking for a space, I found an old blighted warehouse in Brookland and got a deal done. And it's one of those things where when it rains, it pours. We were negotiating at that point on 3 spaces.
Wow.
All at the same time, and kind of had my pick. So we picked the spot that you've come to know and love over in Edgewood. And it's a great location. And we spent the next year designing it and permitting it and building it out. And we opened 6 years and 5 days ago.
Wow, that's so exciting. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so, April 16th, 2014.
Wow, that's incredible. And Mess Hall really kind of has become a destination, I think, in that neighborhood. There's so many different events that you guys host and so many different things that you put on. But maybe you could share a little bit more about what Mess Hall does specifically for its members. And maybe you could kind of share what are the benefits for a food entrepreneur who participates in a community?
Yeah, so Mess Hall has kind of come to be everything that I ended up putting in the business plan, everything that I hoped it to be. When I decided to make this shared space, I also wanted to be able to utilize connections that I had within the industry and be able to offer these other small businesses who would be sharing the space, the opportunities that might come of different relationships. And also just some, hand-holding and coddling and ushering of the business to market. So we are a shared space of about 10,000 square feet. We have 4 different kitchens, a lot of storage space, a lot of workspaces, a lot of equipment, a lot of ovens. But I think more importantly, we are a community of who sign on as a member. To open up their business, and then we share with them our social capital. And what I mean by that is we have relationships, for example, with the breweries in town. So if DC Brow is having growler hours in their tap room, we'll call up and say, hey, we've got this food truck who's new and would love to sell at DC Brow. And they'll say, great, send them over next Saturday. And then they'll set up shop, and while people come and get their growlers or have a couple of beers, they'll have some really great barbecue to go with that from the truck that's outside.
I think creating that community is so important, especially in the food space. I think like trying to break into a local scene isn't always easy. So if you kind of have that can be incredibly valuable. What other kind of programming do you offer for participants in the community?
We do something that we call food jump workshops. We use the term food jump, which is something that we coined to mean that somebody's gone from kind of a concept to a self-sustaining business and kind of made the jump. So we do food jump workshops, which will include a speaker series from anyone, from an attorney who's talking about trademark or patent, trade secret, intellectual property matters, which we did as recently as last week.
Wow.
To prevention of sexual harassment in the workplace, to what kind of insurance do I need, and have an insurance expert come, or how do I best shoot my food using an iPhone or a digital SLR or anything in between, what kind of lighting packages, or how do I shoot it in the best light? So we'll have people talk about that, or how to have an excellent presence in social media. So we curate these these food jump workshop series, and invite the whole community in. And while now they're virtual, we usually would also use those as social gatherings so that the members could also meet each other in case they don't happen to be in the kitchen at the same time.
That's interesting. And yeah, just you did kind of touch on this. We are in some challenging times right now for the event and in-person interaction space. How have you and how have members kind of evolved to the changing landscape that we're all facing right now?
There's been some really great examples, and some of this came out of a food jump workshop that we did in collaboration with Catholic University of America, which is of course how we met. So when the pandemic hit in March, we decided to get together and do a Zoom call with some of the professors, and did a deep dive into how people could pivot their businesses into COVID landscape. So a couple that came out of that of note, and there's probably a lot of examples, but one of my favorites is Saya Salteña. And Maria, who owns Creative Catering, and who had a really strong and thriving social catering business that also did a lot of business with George Washington University and their sports teams, found that her hugely successful business was drying up. So she went back to a product that she had been tinkering with over the course of years called salteñas, which is basically a Bolivian hand pie.
Cool.
And it's a savory dish that's very much a street food in her home country. And it's filled with like a beef stew or a chicken stew, and they have vegetarian ones. And you eat it kind of standing up, and it's filled with soup. It's this tree that holds the soup. They're incredible. I know. Yeah, and actually, funnily enough, when you eat it, the tradition is that in Bolivia, anyway, you have to be. It's a bit of a talent, right? So, and the tradition is that whoever gets a drop of soup on their napkin or on their plate, they have to buy the next round. Yeah, so you have to have the skills. And so she's made that her thing now. So she's on Uber Eats and delivery platforms, and will probably be breaking into supermarkets, and they freeze really, really well.
Wow.
So she'll pivot from catering company to consumer packaged good, and then also utilizing this ghost kitchen model, which is going to be more and more popular.
Yeah, absolutely. So then what other advice would you say you would give to an aspiring food entrepreneur or any entrepreneur right now? Because I think you've kind of stepped into so many different spaces. I think, your advice is really valuable.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think, avoiding some of the biggest problems or pitfalls would be certainly advisable. One of the biggest pitfalls is when a company starts off and it's undercapitalized. Sometimes people don't really figure for unexpected costs or hiring staff. They don't value their own time, so they haven't necessarily budgeted in for labor. But the reality is your time is valuable, and there's hires that you have to make. So budgeting appropriately for that, and for a rainy day or for a pandemic, as it were, are ways that, and making sure that you have a three months of reserves on hand are ways to help mitigate issues that you might have down the line when you need to buy inventory. So that's one of the biggest pieces of advice, is to plan ahead and really let your P&L, your profit and loss sheet, drive everything. If you want to start a business, find the pain point and then create the aspirin for it.